2020 was a disastrous year. We had pandemics, we had major losses, we've had fires, and we had the NFC East. One of the worst divisions in football history. The winner of the division had 7 wins and doesn't even have a name. Everything about this NFC East, this 2020 NFC East, is embarrassing to the NFL, to sports. Honestly, this is a season to be forgotten for all 4 of those teams. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Yossi Del Castillo, and you are watching The Sound of Sports. The NFC East consists of 4 classic teams. You have the Eagles in Philadelphia, you have the Dallas Cowboys, you have the Washington football team, name redacted, and you have the New York Giants. The only thing that was interesting about the 2020 NFC East is how bad each of the teams were. I'm actually embarrassed for the Washington football team that they're going in with 7 wins. I am an Eagles fan, and I am genuinely glad that my Eagles did not go into the playoffs with a 6 or 7 win record. None of these teams, all 4 of them, need to reevaluate everything about their organization. The coaching, ownership, the players. And when you make the playoffs, you're kind of setting yourself back because you're giving yourself an excuse. The Washington football team is now has the worst draft capital. They don't really have a quarterback of the future. Their ownership is still terrible, but here they are in the playoffs. Oh, good job, we made the playoffs. Nothing is good about that. When you're in a position like New York, Philadelphia, and Dallas, these teams know they have to reevaluate. There's something that went wrong. We did not make the playoffs, and we have a terrible record. The Dallas Cowboys had an embarrassing start since their offseason. Everything about their offseason was embarrassing, at least to me. Everybody loved the CeeDee Lamb pick. I hated the CeeDee Lamb pick. They need offensive linemen. They need defensive backs. I mean, clearly they have major issues on defense, but they decided, you know what? We have 2 1,000-yard receivers. Why not add a third? Oh, and we have a premier running back. Well, maybe not so premier anymore. So they added another weapon. Jerry Jones was arrogant. He said, I need more weapons. I'm going to take a weapon here. And he did. And it backfired. Every single game with Dak Prescott, even before Dak Prescott's injury, every single game was a disaster for 3 quarters, and Dallas found a way to claw back in and lose the game regardless. Sure, Dak Prescott had nice stats, but it didn't result in any wins. Even before Dak Prescott's injury, which I believe was in week 6, they only had 1 or 2 wins. They were embarrassing. And then Dak Prescott gets injured. Andy Dalton does the same thing Prescott does with just less flashy stats. Sure, at the end of the year, the last 4 games, they catch a little bit of fire. And unfortunately, it was too little too late, as they just couldn't beat the New York Giants in week 17 to keep their playoff hopes alive. Everything about that season was absolutely terrible. And you know what? You know what makes me so happy? Is that all the Cowboys fans thought, oh, if we get rid of Jason Garrett, all our problems will fly away. Well, guess what? You hired a Super Bowl winning coach with years of experience in Mike McCarthy. And you know what? The problems got worse. It wasn't Jason Garrett. It's your organization. It's Jerry Jones being arrogant and drafting players he doesn't need. It's the awful defense that is built. It's the coordinators. It's not Jason Garrett. It's everybody. Well, they got to figure out what the heck to do with Dak Prescott, because there seems to be a lot of turmoil there. Dak Prescott's not happy that they didn't pay him, especially now that he has an injury. They need to figure out what they're going to do with Dak Prescott. That's first and foremost. If they choose not to bring him back, they could very likely pick a quarterback with their high draft pick. And if they do bring back Prescott, they better pick somebody like an offensive lineman or a defensive back to help that team grow. There's not a lot of cap room in Dallas anymore now that they're paying Zeke. Cooper. They're going to have to eventually play Gallup. They're paying a top-tier offensive lineman. Dallas needs a lot of work, and it's going to have to start at Dak Prescott. I really couldn't tell you whether or not they're going to bring him back. It's going to be a very interesting offseason in Dallas. Now let's talk about my team, the Philadelphia Eagles. And they're just as embarrassing as Dallas. Again, we'll start at the draft. Oh, how about the Eagles missing on another superstar receiver in Justin Jefferson, a guy who ended his season with 1,400 yards. And you know, who do they pick? They pick Jalen Reagor. They reach for him, a guy they probably could have gotten in the second round if they traded up, instead of the best receiver in the draft. So it starts there. That's embarrassing. And then it goes to the regular season, where Carson Wentz has the worst performance in the NFL in terms of quarterback. Carson Wentz, his mechanics are all over the place. He's not working with the coaches. He's playing hero ball. And then it goes to the injuries. I don't know what the heck happens in Philadelphia, but every year there is more injuries than any other team in the league. I don't know if it's the water they drink. I don't know what happens there in that medical staff, because nobody in that organization can stay healthy. It goes to Doug Peterson, who was once a great fourth down caller, but now can't convert any 4th and 1 that's in front of him. Philadelphia has so many holes. They have holes in the offensive line. They have zero cap. They're paying a quarterback who's now benched $150 million. Their corners are old. The corners are decimated. They have one good corner in Darius Slay, who's old and now. Their defensive line is getting older. There's a lot of work in Philadelphia. This is not a team that will be ready for the playoffs anytime soon. But the good news for Philadelphia is that they were the worst team in the NFC East, which means that they have a top 6 selection in the draft, which means that they can fix one of those holes very swiftly and quickly. So that's one thing that the Eagles fans have to look forward to this offseason, the NFL draft. And you know what? Howie Roseman better not screw up that number 6 overall selection. Another thing Philadelphia has to figure out is, what the heck do you do with your quarterback position? Do you trade Wentz? Do you go with Hurts? Do you keep both and figure out what happens? I couldn't give you an educated guess, but that is on the top of their priority list. What do you do with Wentz? What do you do with Hurts? Who are you starting? Who are you benching? Who are you trading? In my personal opinion, you got to go with Hurts. You got to go with the guy who's better. This is a business. I get it. You're paying Carson Wentz, but you got to do what you got to do to win. And Hurts is that option. Now let's go to the New York Giants. The team that had an absolute meltdown because their 6-10 team didn't make the playoffs. I don't feel bad for you. Why should I feel bad for you that your 6-win team didn't make the playoffs? I mean, on Twitter last night, Giants players and fans were raging that the Eagles threw the game on purpose because their 6-win team didn't make the playoffs. Your team didn't make the playoffs because they were garbage. That entire team is garbage. They've been garbage. Daniel Jones, he has a lot of work. He's not polished, and he's entering a very important year in his career. That defense has a lot of work. It's very inconsistent. They have decent weapons, but nothing is clicking. There are a lot of what we saw of the Giants last year. While the Giants aren't as embarrassing as the Cowboys and the Eagles, because both of those teams had potential to be good teams this year, the Giants just continued to be what they were. They didn't progress, they didn't get worse, they didn't get better. Daniel Jones looks to be the same guy as he was 2 years ago and last year. What do the Giants have to focus on this offseason? Is Daniel Jones your future? Do you go with Daniel Jones? Do you go with the guy in the draft? Do you sign somebody? They also have to make sure that they fix that defensive front. They have no pressure. They bring no pressure at all to their opponents. That's what they use their draft pick on, I'm assuming, unless they draft a quarterback. They have to focus on that. They have a good amount of cap space that they can use, and they can start the process of getting better. They're already through that rebuilding phase. They just need to push over the line. And let's talk about the NFC East champions, the Washington football team. Where do I start with you guys? Let's start at the offseason, where you were forced to change your name and you picked the name football team. Already an embarrassment. And then you have all of the allegations with the owner, Dan Snyder, and all that nasty stuff that was happening in that organization. I mean, your logo is now a W. It's just all of their offseason was just an absolute mess. Then comes the season. Dwayne Haskins is an embarrassment to himself. He's a bust. Dan Snyder is the worst owner in the league. And congratulations, Washington football team. You finally made the playoffs with 7 wins. I'm happy for Alex Smith. He is a great story. Ron Rivera is a great story. But you making the playoffs with 7 wins is not going to do anything for your organization long term. Next year, you guys are not going to make the playoffs, and you are going to be worse than what you were this year. I'll tell you why. Because Alex Smith, a guy who can barely run anymore, is likely not going to be in Washington or going to retire. And now you set up yourself in a position where you're going to have to draft very high, so you can't even get a quarterback. So yeah, sure, congratulations, Washington. You're going to enjoy a wild card week where you're going to get blown out by the Bucs. But guess what? Long term, you set yourself up for failure. That's why I'd rather be any other team in this division than the Washington football team. Because they made a meaningless playoff appearance, and they're going to get blown out by Tampa. So what does Washington have to do this offseason? They have to find a quarterback, and they have to do it ASAP. Whether they're signing one, whether they trade up for one, they have to find a quarterback because Alex Smith is not going to be there. Dwayne Haskins is gone, so they literally have nobody. So they have to find a quarterback who can start next year and not waste the potential of this very strong defense that they built. Ladies and gentlemen, the NFC East was an embarrassment. Each and every single one of these teams. Each of these teams have a major offseason ahead of them. And to be honest, I'm more interested in this upcoming offseason than any of the games that these 4 teams played this last season. Thank you so much for watching The Sound of Sports. I'm Yossi Castillo, and as always, I will see you in the next video.